I paid for my sister's lawyer to sue me. Worth every penny. The bank statement in my hands showed a withdrawal of $47,000 on March 15, 2024. The memo line read, Home Improvements, Kitchen Remodel. I stared at it until the numbers blurred, then looked around my grandmother's kitchen. The same avocado green appliances from 1987. The same peeling linoleum. The same cabinet doors hanging askew on broken hinges. My grandmother, Eleanor, sat at her rickety dining table, carefully counting out pills into a weekly organizer. At 84, her hands shook slightly, but her mind remained sharp as ever. Too sharp. She knew something was wrong with her finances, but couldn't figure out what. The bank keeps telling me my account is low, she'd whispered to me last week during my regular Thursday visit. But Melissa handles all that now. She says I don't need to worry. Melissa. My 25-year-old sister who'd convinced Grandma Eleanor to sign over financial power of attorney 2 years ago after a minor fall. The same Melissa who just posted Instagram photos from her weekend in the Hamptons, designer handbag prominently displayed, captioned, living my best life. #blessed. I flipped through more statements. February, $12,000 withdrawal marked, medical expenses. January, $23,000 for, emergency home repairs. December, $38,000 for, assisted living evaluation fees. Pure fiction. All of it. Grandma Eleanor still lived alone in the same house where she'd raised Melissa and me after our parents died. The house that now had a leaking roof she couldn't afford to fix. The house where she'd started eating one meal a day because she believed she couldn't afford groceries. Meanwhile, Melissa had moved into a luxury apartment in Manhattan, drove a brand new BMW, and wore clothes that cost more than most people's rent. When I'd asked about her sudden wealth, she'd laughed it off. I'm doing really well with my marketing consulting business. Marketing consulting. She'd never held a job for more than 6 months in her life. I'd hired a forensic accountant, Rebecca Chen, who'd spent 3 weeks untangling 2 years of financial records. The numbers were staggering. In 24 months, Melissa had systematically drained $340,000 from her grandmother's accounts. Money that was supposed to last Eleanor the rest of her life. Money she'd saved working double shifts as a nurse for 40 years. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures. Fake invoices. Withdrawals that coincidentally matched Melissa's spending sprees down to the dollar. Rebecca had documented everything in a 47-page report that read like a manual for elder financial abuse. Yesterday, I confronted Melissa at her apartment. She'd answered the door in a silk robe, fresh from what she called her self-care Sunday spa day. We need to talk about Grandma's money, I'd said, holding up the bank statements. Her face had gone through several expressions, surprise, fear, anger, before settling on indignant rage. How dare you spy on family finances? This is harassment, David. I'm protecting Grandma from making poor decisions. She asked me to help her. By stealing $340,000. That's defamation, she'd screamed. I document every expense. I'm going to sue you for harassment and defamation. I'll destroy your precious little company's reputation. No one will want to work with someone who attacks vulnerable family members. She'd slammed the door in my face. This morning, she texted, my lawyer says I have an excellent case. Hope your business survives the scandal. I smiled, opening my laptop to draft an email to Morrison, Klein & Associates, the most expensive law firm in the city. My sister wanted the best legal representation money could buy. She was about to get it. The law offices of Morrison, Klein & Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown. Their lobby looked like something out of Architectural Digest, Italian marble, original Rothkos, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. Perfect. I'd done my research. Marcus Morrison had never lost a defamation case. His hourly rate of $850 made my accountant weep, but his track record was flawless. If my sister wanted to threaten me with the best lawyer money could buy, I'd make sure she got exactly that. The receptionist, a polished woman named Patricia, smiled as I approached her desk at exactly 3 p.m. Mr. Chen. Mr. Morrison is ready for you. I'd used my middle name for the appointment. David Chen instead of David Park. A small precaution that would keep Melissa from connecting the dots too early. Marcus Morrison looked like Central Casting's version of a high-powered attorney. Silver hair, custom suit, handshake that could crack walnuts. His corner office overlooked Central Park. So, Mr. Chen, Patricia mentioned you're interested in retaining our services for someone else. That's unusual. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. I need to hire you to represent my sister in a defamation lawsuit against me. His eyebrows shot up. I'm sorry, what? My name is actually David Park. My sister, Melissa Park, believes she has grounds to sue me for defamation and harassment. She's going to be calling you, probably today or tomorrow. When she does, I want you to take her case. Morrison leaned back in his chair. This is highly irregular. Why would you want to hire counsel against yourself? I pulled out Rebecca's forensic accounting report and slid it across his mahogany desk. Because during discovery, you're going to subpoena all her financial records. And when you do, you're going to find that she's stolen $340,000 from our 84-year-old grandmother. He opened the folder and started reading. His expression grew darker with each page. Jesus Christ, he muttered after 5 minutes. This is elder abuse. Criminal elder abuse. Why aren't you going to the police? I tried. Detective Williams at the 14th Precinct said financial elder abuse cases are hard to prosecute without the victim's cooperation. My grandmother still believes Melissa is helping her. She won't press charges against her precious granddaughter. Morrison kept reading. These forged signatures, this is sophisticated fraud. Melissa's always been smart. Just not smart enough to realize that when she sues me for defamation, she'll have to prove her reputation was damaged by false statements. Which means proving she didn't steal the money. Which means opening up all her financial records for examination. And you want me to be very thorough in building her case. I want you to be the most thorough attorney who ever lived. Subpoena everything. Bank records, credit card statements, investment accounts, PayPal, Venmo, cryptocurrency wallets. Leave no stone unturned in defending her innocence. Morrison closed the folder and studied me. You realize that if I take her case, I can't represent you when she inevitably gets arrested? I don't need representation. I need justice for my grandmother. And I need Melissa to understand that actions have consequences. My retainer is $50,000. I pulled out my checkbook. Bill me for whatever else you need. Just promise me one thing. When you find evidence of the theft, and you will, you're ethically obligated to report it to authorities, right? Morrison smiled grimly. Oh yes. Elder abuse is a mandatory reporting situation. The moment I discover evidence of financial exploitation, I'll have no choice but to contact Adult Protective Services and the DA's office. I signed the check with a flourish. Then we have a deal. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. Patricia's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Morrison. I have a Melissa Park on line 1. She says she needs the best defamation attorney in the city. Morrison's smile could have powered the city grid. He looked at me, then at his phone, then back at me like Christmas had come early. Mr. Chen, sorry, Mr. Park, would you mind stepping into our conference room? Patricia will show you to conference room B. This shouldn't take long. I settled into a leather chair that probably cost more than my first car and watched through the glass partition as Morrison picked up his phone. Even though I couldn't hear the conversation, I could read his body language perfectly. Concerned nodding. Serious note-taking. The occasional, that sounds terrible, and we absolutely cannot let him get away with this. 23 minutes later, he knocked on the conference room door. Your sister is quite passionate about her case. That's one word for it. She's also convinced she's going to take you for everything you're worth. Apparently your tech company has been quite successful. I nodded. Park Analytics had grown from a 2-person startup in my apartment to a 40-employee firm with clients across 3 continents. We weren't Google, but we weren't exactly hurting either. She seems to think you're worth around $12 million. She's been doing research. Morrison sat across from me, his legal pad covered in notes. She also mentioned that your harassment has been ongoing for weeks. Following her to restaurants, showing up at her apartment building, questioning her friends about her finances. None of that happened. I figured. But it's interesting that she's building a narrative about extensive stalking behavior. Almost like she's been planning this lawsuit for a while. That stopped me cold. What do you mean? Well, most people don't have specific dollar amounts ready when they call about defamation. And they don't usually have detailed timelines of alleged harassment memorized. Your sister rattled off dates, times, locations. March 18th at Café Luna, March 22nd at Bergdorf Goodman, March 25th outside her building at 7:30 p.m. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I was never at any of those places. But someone was. Someone she claims was you. Morrison leaned forward. David, I think your sister has been setting up this lawsuit for weeks. Maybe longer. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Melissa wasn't just stealing from Grandma Eleanor, she'd been preparing for the possibility of getting caught. Building a preemptive legal strategy to discredit anyone who might expose her. She's been planning to destroy me before I could destroy her. It gets worse. She mentioned that she has witnesses to your harassment. People who can testify that you've been stalking her, making threats. What people? Morrison consulted his notes. A doorman named Carlos who allegedly saw you lurking outside her building. A server at Café Luna who supposedly heard you making threatening comments. And someone she referred to as Dr. Peterson, who can testify about the emotional trauma your harassment has caused her. This is insane. She's fabricating evidence. Maybe. Or maybe she's been very careful about creating situations where she could claim harassment occurred. Think about it, if someone questioned her finances, she could immediately pivot to being the victim of a stalking campaign. I stared out the conference room window at the city below. My sister wasn't just a thief. She was a chess player, thinking 3 moves ahead. There's something else, Morrison continued. She wants to fast-track this case. Push for an expedited discovery timeline and an emergency restraining order to stop your alleged harassment immediately. How fast? She wants deposition scheduled within 2 weeks. She's claiming ongoing emotional distress and damage to her business reputation that requires immediate legal remedy. I almost laughed. What business reputation? She doesn't have a business. Well, that's going to be very interesting to explore in discovery, isn't it? Morrison's smile returned. Because if she's claiming damages to her business, we'll need to examine every aspect of her income sources. Every bank account, every client payment, every business expense. How thorough can you be? David, your sister just handed me a blank check to investigate her entire financial life. And she wants it done quickly, which means less time for her to hide evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, hope you're ready to lose everything. My lawyer says this is the strongest harassment case he's ever seen. I showed Morrison the message. He chuckled and made another note. She's awfully confident for someone who's about to hand over 2 years of financial records to a forensic examination. When do we start? She's coming in tomorrow morning to sign the retainer agreement. The moment she does, I become her zealous advocate. His grin turned predatory. And zealous advocates are very, very thorough. The next morning, I sat in my car across the street from Morrison, Klein and Associates, watching Melissa stride up to the building like she owned it. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that I recognized from her Instagram, $4,800, according to the tagged post. Grandma Eleanor's money, wrapped around my sister like armor. My phone rang. Morrison. She just left. Signed everything, paid the retainer, well, tried to. Her American Express was declined. Declined? Don't worry, she had a backup card. But interesting that someone so confident about her finances is having credit issues. She also brought something unexpected. What? Photos. Allegedly of you following her. David, we need to talk. 20 minutes later, I was back in Morrison's office, staring at a manila folder filled with surveillance-style photographs. Grainy shots of a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap, taken from behind or at angles that obscured his face. The timestamps showed March 18th, March 22nd, March 25th, exactly the dates Melissa had mentioned. This isn't me, I said, studying a photo supposedly taken outside Bergdorf Goodman. I was in Boston that week for the Patterson Industries presentation. Can you prove that? Flight records, hotel receipts, client meetings. I gave 3 presentations that week. I looked closer at the photos. Marcus, this guy doesn't even look like me. Different build, wrong height. Morrison pulled out a magnifying glass, apparently high-powered attorneys actually use those. The interesting thing is how professionally these were taken. This isn't someone with an iPhone trying to document harassment. This is someone with expensive camera equipment and surveillance experience. She hired a private investigator to fake stalking photos. Or she hired someone to actually follow her around, creating genuine photos of surveillance that she could attribute to you later. Morrison set down the magnifying glass. Your sister is playing a much more sophisticated game than we realized. My stomach dropped. How much more sophisticated? She also provided a sworn affidavit from Dr. Sarah Peterson, a therapist, documenting sessions about harassment-induced anxiety starting 6 weeks ago. And a statement from Carlos Martinez, her doorman, confirming multiple incidents of a man matching your description loitering outside her building. She's been building this case for over a month. David, I think she's been building this case since she started stealing. This whole thing, the fake evidence, the witnesses, the emotional distress documentation, it's an insurance policy. If anyone discovered the theft, she could immediately flip the script and become the victim. I thought about my grandmother, carefully rationing her medication because she thought she couldn't afford to refill prescriptions early. Meanwhile, Melissa had been spending thousands of dollars creating an elaborate fraud to protect her primary fraud. There's more, Morrison continued. She wants to depose you next Friday. And she specifically requested that we also depose your forensic accountant, Rebecca Chin. Why Rebecca? She claims that your harassment campaign included hiring investigators to violate her privacy. She wants to examine how Rebecca obtained her financial information and whether any laws were broken in the process. This was spiraling beyond my control. Can she do that? If she can prove Rebecca accessed information illegally, it could make our evidence inadmissible. Worse, it could expose you to criminal liability for hiring someone to commit financial crimes. Rebecca didn't break any laws. Grandma Eleanor gave me permission to review accounts she's listed as beneficiary on. Morrison made notes. We'll need to document that permission very carefully. But David, here's what worries me most. Your sister is thinking like someone who's been caught before. What do you mean? This level of preparation, these preemptive legal strategies, this isn't someone learning as they go. This feels like someone who's done this before and learned from previous mistakes. The room felt suddenly cold. You think she's stolen from other people? I think we need to examine her financial history going back more than 2 years. Because if she's done this before, to other elderly relatives, previous employers, former boyfriends, then we're not just dealing with opportunistic theft. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Tell your sister the photos came out great. Payment due by Friday as agreed. J. Wrong number. Had to be. But as I stared at the message, a terrible thought began forming. I showed Morrison the text. His face went pale. David, what's your sister's middle name? Jessica. Melissa Jessica Park. Why? Because I think someone just accidentally texted you instead of her. And I think we just discovered who took those surveillance photos. The pieces fell together like a puzzle made of razor blades. Someone named Jay had been paid to take surveillance photos, and they'd accidentally texted me instead of Melissa Jessica Park. My sister hadn't just been preparing a defense, she'd been orchestrating an elaborate frame job. We need to find out who Jay is, Morrison said, already reaching for his phone. And we need to do it before Friday's deposition. Can't we just trace the number? We can try, but if your sister is as sophisticated as she appears, Jay probably used a burner phone. He paused mid-dial. David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you ever hired anyone to follow Melissa? Even legitimately, like a private investigator to document her spending? No. The only person I hired was Rebecca, and that was just for forensic accounting. Morrison nodded and finished dialing. While he spoke in hushed tones to what sounded like his own investigator, I studied the photos again. The timestamps bothered me. March 18th at Café Luna, I remembered that day clearly because it was when Rebecca first showed me the preliminary findings. I'd spent the entire day in my office, going through bank statements until my eyes burned. March 22nd at Bergdorf Goodman, I was in Boston, but more importantly, why would I follow Melissa to a luxury department store? If I were actually stalking her, wouldn't I try to catch her somewhere incriminating? Unless that was exactly the point. These photos showed me following her to expensive restaurants and high-end stores. Places that would support her narrative of being a successful businesswoman being harassed by a jealous family member, rather than a thief being investigated by her victim's grandson. Morrison hung up. My guy can have preliminary information on that phone number by tomorrow morning. But David, we have a more immediate problem. What now? I just realized something about the deposition timeline. Your sister wants to depose you and Rebecca on the same day, back to back. That's not standard practice for harassment cases. Why not? Because normally, you depose the primary target first, then use their testimony to inform questions for secondary witnesses. Unless. He trailed off, looking troubled. Unless what? Unless she wants to catch inconsistencies between your stories in real time. David, I think she's planning to record both depositions and use any minor discrepancies to claim you and Rebecca coordinated false testimony. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Jay, confirmed Friday pickup location for additional materials. Same rate as surveillance package. I showed Morrison immediately. His expression darkened. She's still paying this person. And there are additional materials being prepared for Friday. He stood up, pacing to his window. David, I think your sister is planning to introduce new evidence during the depositions. Evidence that will make you look even worse. Like what? Audio recordings of threatening phone calls. More photos of alleged stalking. Maybe even fake documents suggesting you've been planning to steal from your grandmother and blame it on her. Morrison turned back to me. Think about it, if she introduces damaging evidence during your deposition, you'll be caught completely off guard. No time to prepare, no ability to verify authenticity. The scope of Melissa's planning was becoming clearer and more terrifying. This wasn't just theft followed by a desperate cover-up. This was a coordinated campaign to destroy my credibility before I could expose her crimes. There's something else, Morrison continued. I've been thinking about her financial records request. She specifically wants to examine how Rebecca obtained bank statements and account information. But here's the thing, that information should be easy to verify through proper channels. So why is she worried about it? Because I don't think all the theft shows up in your grandmother's accounts. David, what if the $340,000 Rebecca found is just what Melissa stole from traceable sources? What if there's more money missing from accounts we haven't discovered yet? The room started spinning. How much more? Investment accounts, retirement funds, insurance policies, safety deposit boxes. Your grandmother worked for 40 years and lived modestly. $340,000 might just be the tip of the iceberg. My phone rang. Grandma Eleanor. David, sweetie, something strange happened today. A man came to the house asking about Melissa. Said he was from some legal firm and needed to verify her address for important papers. Morrison was already shaking his head, making frantic no gestures. What did you tell him, Grandma? I didn't answer the door. You taught me never to answer for strangers. But David, he knew things. He knew Melissa had power of attorney, knew about my accounts at First National. How would a stranger know those things? Did you see what he looked like? Tall man, dark jacket. He had a camera, too. Took pictures of the house, the mailbox. Even looked through my garbage cans before he left. Morrison grabbed a notepad and wrote, Jay is documenting her living conditions. More evidence for Friday. I felt sick. Grandma, don't answer the door for anyone else, okay? And if anyone else comes by, call me immediately. Is everything all right? Melissa hasn't returned my calls in 3 days. 3 days. Right around when I confronted Melissa about the theft. She was now avoiding the person she'd been stealing from, probably to maintain plausible deniability about Grandma Eleanor's living conditions. After I hung up, Morrison was already drafting something on his computer. I'm filing an emergency motion to exclude any evidence not disclosed within the next 24 hours, he said, typing rapidly. And I'm demanding that opposing counsel, that's me, which feels surreal, provide a complete list of all witnesses and materials by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Can you do that when you're representing her? I'm representing her zealously, which means protecting her from any claims that she ambushed you with surprise evidence. It's actually the ethical thing to do. His smile was grim. The fact that it also prevents her from sandbagging you is just good legal strategy. My phone buzzed one more time. This text was from Melissa, can't wait for Friday. Hope you've enjoyed your last week as a respectable businessman. But what she didn't know was that her own attorney was about to demand she turn over every piece of evidence, including financial records that would expose 2 years of systematic theft. Morrison looked up from his typing. David, I think it's time we accelerated our own timeline. The investigator Morrison hired worked fast. By 8 a.m. Thursday morning, I was back in his office staring at a file that made my blood run cold. J is Jason Kellerman, Morrison said, sliding a background report across his desk. Former NYPD detective, lost his license 3 years ago for falsifying evidence in domestic cases. Now he runs what he generously calls a private investigation service. I flipped through police reports, court documents, and a Better Business Bureau file thick with complaints. Jesus, Melissa hired a crooked cop. Gets worse. Look at page 4. Jason Kellerman specialized in manufacturing evidence for divorce cases. Fake surveillance photos, staged scenarios, forged documents. His client list read like a who's who of bitter spouses looking to destroy their exes in court. There's more, Morrison continued. I had my contact run Kellerman's recent financial records. Your sister has paid him $23,000 over the past 6 weeks. That's not just surveillance money, David. That's comprehensive evidence fabrication. My phone buzzed with another misdirected text meant for Melissa, audio files ready for Friday delivery. Voice modulation came out perfect. J. Voice modulation. They were creating fake recordings of me making threats I'd never made. Morrison read the text and immediately grabbed his phone. Patricia, get me Judge Harrison's clerk. I need an emergency hearing this morning. While he arranged what sounded like legal warfare, I studied Kellerman's photo. Mid-50s, stocky build, the kind of face that looked trustworthy until you noticed the eyes. According to his file, he'd been caught planting evidence in at least 4 cases before NYPD finally fired him. David, Morrison said, hanging up. We have a 2 p.m. emergency hearing to exclude fabricated evidence. Judge Harrison is not happy about being pulled into this, but when I mentioned manufactured audio recordings, she cleared her calendar. What happens if the judge says no? Then tomorrow's deposition becomes a nightmare where you'll be confronted with fake evidence designed to destroy your credibility before you can expose Melissa's theft. At 1:45 p.m., I sat in the courtroom gallery watching the strangest legal proceeding of my life unfold. Morrison stood at the plaintiff's table, ostensibly representing my sister's interests, while simultaneously arguing to exclude evidence that would help her case. Judge Harrison looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Morrison, help me understand this. You're representing a mess. Park in a harassment lawsuit, but you're asking me to exclude evidence that would support her claims? Your Honor, my client deserves to win her case based on legitimate evidence, not fabricated materials that could expose her to perjury charges later. Melissa sat beside Morrison looking increasingly confused. She kept whispering urgent questions that he deflected with lawyer speak about protecting her interests and ensuring a clean victory. The prosecutor Morrison had contacted about the elder abuse case, ADA Sarah Kim, had also shown up. She sat in the back row, taking notes on everything. Your Honor, Morrison continued, we have evidence that a witness my client intended to use has a history of manufacturing false evidence in legal proceedings. Using materials from this source would compromise the integrity of these proceedings. Judge Harrison studied the Kellerman file. Ms. Park, did you hire Jason Kellerman? Melissa's face went white. She clearly hadn't expected her own attorney to expose her fraud investigator in open court. He came highly recommended for surveillance work. Were you aware of Mr. Kellerman's background when you hired him? The courtroom went silent. I could see Melissa's mind racing, trying to figure out how to answer without admitting she'd knowingly hired a corrupt ex-cop to manufacture evidence. I trusted his professional expertise, she finally managed. Judge Harrison made notes. Mr. Morrison, what specific materials are you asking me to exclude? Any surveillance photographs, audio recordings, or witness statements obtained or produced by Mr. Kellerman or his associates. Additionally, any evidence not disclosed to opposing counsel at least 48 hours before deposition. Ms. Park, do you object to these restrictions? Another impossible question. If Melissa objected, she'd be admitting she wanted to use potentially fabricated evidence. If she agreed, she'd lose most of her case. I trust my attorney's judgment about what's best for my case. Judge Harrison nodded. Motion granted. Mr. Morrison, I'm also ordering that all evidence in this matter be preserved and made available for review by the District Attorney's Office, given the allegations of evidence fabrication. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught Morrison's eye. He gave me the slightest nod. Phase 1 complete. Now Melissa would go into tomorrow's deposition with no fake evidence, no surprise attacks, and no idea that her financial records were about to be dissected by the same attorney she was paying to protect her. My phone buzzed with a text from her. I don't understand what just happened, but you're still going to pay for what you've done. If only she knew how right she was. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that usually made me optimistic about the day ahead. Today, it felt like walking to my own execution. I sat in Morrison's conference room at 8:47 a.m., watching my sister through the glass partition as she paced the lobby in a $2,800 Armani blazer, another Instagram-tagged purchase from 2 weeks ago. She kept checking her phone, probably wondering why Jason Kellerman hadn't delivered the fabricated evidence she'd paid $23,000 to create. She looks nervous, Morrison observed, settling into the chair across from me with a coffee that cost more than most people's lunch. Good. Nervous people make mistakes. Rebecca Chin arrived at exactly 9 a.m., carrying 3 bankers' boxes of documents and a laptop bag that probably contained enough evidence to put Melissa away for 5 to 10 years. As our forensic accountant, she'd be deposed second, after Melissa had already committed to her version of events under oath. How much additional theft did you find? I asked Rebecca quietly. The $340,000 was conservative, she whispered back. I've identified at least $127,000 in additional suspicious transfers going back 3 years. Investment accounts, a reverse mortgage on your grandmother's house that she doesn't even know about, and... She paused, looking uncomfortable. And what? Life insurance policies. Melissa changed the beneficiaries on 2 of your grandmother's life insurance policies 18 months ago. Combined value of $400,000. My stomach dropped into my shoes. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was long-term financial planning that treated our grandmother like a disposable asset. Morrison's paralegal knocked on the door. They're ready to begin. The deposition room felt smaller than I'd expected. Morrison sat beside Melissa, playing his role as her zealous advocate, while a court reporter positioned her stenography machine with mechanical precision. ADA Sarah Kim had also shown up, technically as an observer but really as a prosecutor gathering evidence for the criminal case that was becoming more inevitable by the hour. Melissa looked confident again, probably assuming that without Kellerman's fabricated evidence, she could still destroy my credibility through sheer force of personality. She'd always been a gifted liar. State your name for the record, Morrison began, his voice taking on the formal tone of legal proceedings. Melissa Jessica Park. And your relationship to the defendant, David Park. He's my older brother. And he's been harassing me for months because he's jealous of my success. Morrison nodded sympathetically. Tell us about this harassment. For the next 47 minutes, Melissa spun an elaborate tale of stalking, threats, and emotional abuse. She claimed I'd been following her since January, making threatening phone calls, and trying to sabotage her business relationships out of sibling rivalry. And what is your business, Ms. Park? Morrison asked innocently. I run a marketing consulting firm. Park Strategic Solutions. We specialize in social media optimization for luxury brands. How long have you been operating this business? 2 years. It's been incredibly successful. Morrison made notes, his expression perfectly neutral. And your income from this business? Last year we grossed $280,000. This year we're on track for over $400,000. I watched ADA Kim scribble numbers in her notepad. Melissa had just claimed under oath that she'd earned $680,000 from a business that, according to Rebecca's investigation, had never filed tax returns, never registered with the state, and had exactly 0 documented clients. That's impressive growth, Morrison continued. I assume you have business bank accounts, client contracts, tax filings we could review to support these income figures. For the first time, Melissa hesitated. Of course. My accountant handles all that. What's your accountant's name? Another pause. Stephen. Morrison. No relation to you, obviously. Morrison's eyebrow twitched almost imperceptibly. She was making up names on the spot. And you maintain business records showing payments from clients? Absolutely. We'll need copies of all those records, of course. Bank statements, client agreements, tax returns for Park Strategic Solutions for 2022 and 2023. Melissa's confidence finally started cracking. I'll have to check with my accountant about confidentiality issues. Ms. Park, you're claiming $680,000 in business income to establish damages from your brother's alleged harassment. We'll need complete financial documentation to support those claims. The color drained from her face as she realized the trap she'd walked into. By claiming massive business success, she'd opened every aspect of her finances to legal scrutiny. And Morrison, as her attorney, was ethically obligated to demand the documentation needed to prove her case. Yes, of course. I'll get those records. Morrison smiled. Excellent. We'll need them by Monday morning for review before we proceed further. The weekend that followed was the longest of my life. Melissa had until Monday morning to produce 2 years of business records for a company that existed only in her imagination. Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone every time it buzzed, wondering if she'd figured out that her own attorney was orchestrating her downfall. Sunday evening, my phone rang. Grandma Eleanor. David, I need to tell you something. Her voice shook in a way I'd never heard before. Melissa came by today. She was different. Different how? Angry. Desperate. She kept asking about papers, about documents I might have given you. She went through my filing cabinet, said she was looking for insurance forms to help with my medical expenses. Eleanor paused. But David, she took things. Old bank statements, the folder with my investment information. She said it was to protect me from your harassment. My blood ran cold. Melissa was trying to hide evidence, using our grandmother's trust to cover her tracks. Did she say anything else? She asked about the house deed. Wanted to know if I'd put anyone else's name on it recently. David, I'm scared. She didn't seem like my granddaughter anymore. She seemed like a stranger wearing Melissa's face. I closed my eyes, thinking about those life insurance beneficiary changes Rebecca had discovered. Grandma, I need you to do something for me. Don't sign any papers Melissa brings you, okay? Nothing at all. Tell her you want me to look at them first. She said you might try to turn me against her. She said you're trying to steal my money and blame it on her. The projection was perfect. Melissa was accusing me of exactly what she'd been doing for 2 years. Monday morning, 9:15 a.m. Morrison's conference room felt like a courtroom as Melissa arrived carrying a single manila folder. Her usual designer confidence had been replaced by something brittle and manic. I have the business records you requested, she announced, sliding the folder across the table. Morrison opened it and immediately frowned. Inside were 3 bank statements from a personal checking account, 2 fake invoices from fictional clients, and what appeared to be a handwritten profit and loss statement created sometime over the weekend. Ms. Park, these are personal bank statements, not business records. Park Strategic Solutions operates as a sole proprietorship. All business income flows through my personal accounts. Morrison studied the statements with the attention of a surgeon examining a tumor. I see multiple large deposits here. March 15th, $47,000. February 8th, $23,000. January 12th, $38,000. These match the amounts you've claimed as client payments. Exactly. Those are payments from major consulting contracts. Ada Kim leaned forward in her observer chair, pen poised over her notepad. And these deposits correlate to specific client deliverables. Morrison continued. Yes. Campaign launches, brand strategy implementations, social media audits. Morrison pulled out a different set of papers, bank statements I recognized as copies of my grandmother's accounts. Ms. Park, I'm going to show you some additional financial records. Can you explain why the deposits in your personal account occur on the exact same dates as withdrawals from Eleanor Park's savings account? Same amounts, down to the penny. The silence in the room was deafening. Melissa stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. I don't know what those are. These are your grandmother's bank statements. The woman who gave you power of attorney to help manage her finances. Morrison's voice remained professionally neutral, but I could see the prosecutor in him emerging. Are you claiming it's a coincidence that your business received $47,000 on the same day $47,000 was withdrawn from her account for home improvements? Melissa's hand started shaking. Those must be fake. David probably created them to frame me. Ms. Park, these came directly from First National Bank in response to a legal subpoena. Are you suggesting the bank is participating in a conspiracy against you? She looked around the room desperately, finally understanding that her own attorney was systematically destroying her story using evidence she'd been forced to provide. I want a different lawyer, she whispered. Morrison smiled with perfect professional courtesy. Of course. That's your right. But first, we'll need to conclude this deposition with a few more questions about these remarkable financial coincidences. The next 20 minutes felt like watching a controlled demolition. Morrison methodically walked Melissa through each fraudulent transaction, her explanations becoming more desperate and contradictory with every question. Ms. Park, you testified that the $38,000 deposit on January 12th was payment for a social media campaign for luxury handbag brand Castellano and Associates. Is that correct? Yes, that's right. Morrison consulted his notes. Yet when we contacted Castellano and Associates yesterday, they informed us they've never heard of Park Strategic Solutions. In fact, they handle all marketing internally and haven't hired outside consultants in over 3 years. Melissa's face cycled through panic, rage, and something approaching despair. They're lying. David probably paid them to say that. Ms. Park, are you suggesting your brother bribed a Fortune 500 company to provide false testimony in a civil harassment case? Ada Kim was writing so furiously I thought her pen might catch fire. Rebecca Chen sat beside me, occasionally sliding additional documents to Morrison with the efficiency of a surgical nurse. Let's discuss another transaction, Morrison continued. The $23,000 withdrawal from your grandmother's account on February 8th was marked medical expenses, specialist consultation. You've testified this corresponded to a consulting payment. Can you explain why your grandmother's medical expenses became your business income? I helped arrange the consultation. The payment was a finder's fee. A $23,000 finder's fee for arranging a medical appointment. It was a very specialized consultation. Morrison pulled out another document. According to Eleanor Park's Medicare records, she received no medical care in February beyond her regular monthly checkup with Dr. Martinez, which cost $180 and was fully covered by insurance. I watched my sister's world collapse in real time. Every lie she told created new contradictions, every explanation opened fresh avenues for investigation. Morrison was systematically documenting 2 years of elder abuse while she sat there thinking he was defending her. Ms. Park, let's discuss your grandmother's living situation. You've testified that your business success allows you to help support her financially. Can you describe her current living conditions? She's very comfortable. I make sure all her needs are met. When did you last visit her home? Melissa hesitated. Last weekend. And how would you characterize the condition of the property? It's fine. Well maintained. Morrison nodded to his paralegal, who handed him a manila envelope. I'm showing you photographs taken yesterday of Eleanor Park's residence. Would you describe a roof with multiple visible leaks as well maintained? The photos showed what I saw every Thursday when I visited: peeling paint, broken gutters, a front porch with rotting floorboards. My grandmother's house looked like what it was, the home of someone who believed she couldn't afford basic repairs. Those photos could be from anywhere, Melissa said weakly. The address is clearly visible on the mailbox. Ms. Park, if you're earning $400,000 annually and helping support your grandmother, why is she living in a house with a collapsing roof? She refuses help. She's stubborn about accepting money. Morrison consulted more documents. Yet according to these bank records, you've withdrawn over $400,000 from her accounts over 2 years. If she won't accept help, why does she keep giving you money? Those records are fabricated. By the bank? By David. Ms. Park, are you testifying that your brother somehow hacked into First National Bank's computer systems and created fake records showing systematic withdrawals from your grandmother's accounts? The absurdity of her accusations was becoming comical, except for the fact that every dollar she'd stolen meant another month my grandmother ate one meal a day or skipped medications she thought she couldn't afford. I need to call someone, Melissa said suddenly. I need to make a phone call. Morrison checked his watch. We can take a 15-minute recess. As soon as Melissa left the room, ADA Kim approached our table. I've heard enough. I'm filing elder abuse charges this afternoon. The bank records alone are sufficient for a grand jury indictment. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa: I know what you're doing. This isn't over. But as I watched her through the conference room windows, frantically pacing the hallway while shouting into her phone, I realized she was wrong. This was exactly how it was going to end. When Melissa returned from her phone call, she looked like someone who just received devastating news. Her usual predatory confidence had been replaced by something desperate and cornered. I've spoken with my business partner, she announced, settling back into her chair with forced composure. He's advised me to clarify a few things about our corporate structure. Morrison raised an eyebrow. Your business partner? This is the first mention of a partner in Park Strategic Solutions. Trevor Hamilton. He handles the financial side while I focus on client relations. That's why some of the documentation might seem unconventional. I felt a chill run down my spine. Trevor Hamilton was our cousin, Eleanor's other grandson from her deceased daughter's side of the family. He'd moved to California 5 years ago after a series of failed business ventures that had left him bankrupt and bitter. Morrison made careful notes. And Mr. Hamilton can verify the legitimacy of these client payments? Absolutely. He'll testify that every deposit was legitimate business income. ADA Kim looked up from her notepad sharply. Something about this new development had caught her prosecutor's instincts. Ms. Park, Morrison continued, when you say Mr. Hamilton handles the financial side, does that mean he has access to the business accounts we've been discussing? He manages all our banking relationships, yes. Including the account that received the $340,000 in deposits we've been examining? That's correct. Morrison pulled out his phone and typed a quick message. Within 30 seconds, he received a reply that made his expression darken considerably. Ms. Park, I need to ask you about another financial matter. Are you aware that your grandmother recently took out a reverse mortgage on her property? Melissa's face went completely white. A what? A reverse mortgage. Someone with power of attorney signed documents 3 months ago to borrow $180,000 against Eleanor Park's house. The funds were deposited into an account at Wells Fargo under the name Hamilton Holdings LLC. The room went dead silent. I stared at my sister, realizing that Trevor's involvement meant this wasn't just theft, it was a coordinated conspiracy that had been expanding even while we sat here. I don't know anything about that, Melissa whispered. Morrison consulted his phone again. MS. Park, the signature on the reverse mortgage documents is notarized and matches samples of your handwriting from the power of attorney paperwork. Are you claiming someone forged your signature? Trevor handles all the complex financial instruments. I sign what he tells me to sign. So you did sign documents for a reverse mortgage on your grandmother's home? Melissa looked trapped between admitting to mortgage fraud or throwing her co-conspirator under the bus. If I signed anything, it was because Trevor said it was necessary for tax optimization. ADA Kim stood up abruptly. They were the tears of someone who just realized the game was over and the consequences were far worse than she'd ever imagined. I want a lawyer, she said through her sobs. A different lawyer. A real lawyer. Agent Rodriguez smiled grimly. You're going to need one. The FBI agents cleared everyone except Melissa and her soon-to-be former attorney from the conference room. Through the glass partition, I watched Agent Rodriguez methodically laying out photographs and documents while my sister's face grew paler with each revelation. Morrison, ADA Kim, Rebecca, and I huddled in the adjacent conference room, where Morrison was fielding phone calls that sounded increasingly urgent. That was Agent Rodriguez, he said, hanging up his phone. The Hamilton Holdings investigation goes deeper than we thought. Trevor Hamilton has been recruiting accomplices through social media, targeting people with elderly relatives who have significant assets but no close family oversight. How did he find Melissa? Rebecca asked. Facebook. 3 years ago, she posted about visiting your grandmother for her birthday, mentioned how Grandma Eleanor has been so generous helping with my student loans. Hamilton reached out, claimed he was developing a family financial planning service and wanted to discuss strategies for maximizing intergenerational wealth transfer. I felt sick. My sister's narcissistic social media habits had literally painted a target on our grandmother's back. There's more, Morrison continued. Hamilton's operation wasn't just stealing cash. They were creating fake investment portfolios, phantom annuities, and shell companies designed to move elderly people's assets into accounts that looked legitimate but were completely controlled by the conspirators. Ada Kim looked up from the legal documents she'd been reviewing. David, we need to ask you about something. When did your grandmother first mention having financial concerns? I thought back to those Thursday visits, the subtle signs I'd initially dismissed. About 6 months ago. She started mentioning that her investments weren't performing well and that Melissa was helping her restructure her portfolio for better returns. Hamilton Holdings created fake investment statements, Morrison explained. Your grandmother probably received official-looking documents showing her money was invested in legitimate funds, when in reality it was being systematically stolen. Rebecca pulled out her laptop and started typing rapidly. If they were generating fake investment reports, there should be digital trails. Email accounts, printing services, maybe even subscription services for financial document templates. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Your sister's partner wants to meet. Says he has information about other family members. Starbucks on 42nd and Lex, 1 hour. Come alone. I showed the message to Morrison, who immediately shook his head. Absolutely not. That's either Hamilton trying to intimidate you, or someone else involved in this operation looking to cut a deal. Agent Rodriguez knocked on the conference room door. Mr. Park, we need to discuss something with you privately. The FBI agent's expression was grim as he led me to Morrison's private office and closed the door. We intercepted communications between Hamilton and your sister from this morning, he said, pulling out what looked like a transcript. They've been discussing something called Phase 3 for the past week. Phase 3. According to these messages, they were planning to have your grandmother declared mentally incompetent so they could gain complete control over her remaining assets. They'd already contacted a corrupt doctor who specializes in providing questionable competency evaluations for financial exploitation cases. The room started spinning. They were going to have her committed. Worse. The plan was to move her into a substandard nursing facility that's part of Hamilton's network, then liquidate everything she owns. Her house, her remaining accounts, even her personal belongings. We estimate they could have extracted another $600,000 in assets. I gripped the chair to keep from falling over. While I'd been focused on the money they'd already stolen, Melissa and Hamilton had been preparing to completely destroy our grandmother's independence and dignity. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. The text you received about meeting at Starbucks? We think that's Hamilton himself. He's in New York, and he's desperate. When criminals get this desperate, they become unpredictable. Agent Rodriguez handed me a small device that looked like a modified phone. If you're willing to help us, we'd like you to take that meeting. The wire I wore felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as I walked into the Starbucks on 42nd and Lexington. Agent Rodriguez had spent 20 minutes explaining how the recording device worked, but all I could think about was my grandmother counting pills at her kitchen table while these people planned to have her declared mentally incompetent. Trevor Hamilton looked exactly like I remembered from family gatherings 5 years ago, except now his desperate charm had a predatory edge. He'd chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances, the kind of precaution that suggested he knew federal agents might be watching. David, he said, standing to embrace me like we were still family. Thanks for coming. I know this situation with Melissa has gotten complicated. I sat across from him, hyper-aware of the FBI surveillance team positioned throughout the coffee shop. Agent Martinez was reading a newspaper 2 tables over. Agent Chin worked on a laptop near the window. They looked like ordinary customers, but I could feel their attention focused on our conversation. Complicated is one word for it, I said, keeping my voice steady. The FBI seems to think you've been running a multi-state fraud operation. Trevor's smile faltered for just a moment. The FBI has a tendency to overcomplicate business relationships. Melissa and I were helping elderly family members optimize their financial situations. Everything was completely legal. Including the reverse mortgage on my grandmother's house that she doesn't even know exists. Eleanor signed all the appropriate documentation. We have her explicit consent for every transaction. Trevor pulled out his phone and showed me what appeared to be a voice recording app. In fact, I have recordings of her specifically requesting our help with managing her investments. The recordings. Agent Rodriguez had warned me that Hamilton specialized in creating fake audio evidence, using snippets of legitimate conversations to manufacture consent for financial transactions. I'd like to hear those recordings, I said. Trevor tapped his phone screen, and my grandmother's voice filled the space between us. I just don't understand these investment accounts anymore, Trevor. I trust you and Melissa to do what's best for my future. It sounded completely authentic, except I recognized the background noise. That conversation had happened at last year's Thanksgiving dinner, when Trevor had asked general questions about retirement planning. He'd edited her innocent response to sound like consent for his criminal operation. Pretty convincing, I said carefully. How many of these recordings do you have? Enough to prove that every financial decision was made with Eleanor's full knowledge and consent. Trevor leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But David, I'm concerned about you. Melissa told me you've been acting erratically. Following her around, making threats. That kind of behavior could really damage your reputation if it becomes public. The threat was clear: cooperate with their narrative, or face a coordinated campaign to destroy my credibility using the same manufactured evidence that had fooled other families. What exactly are you proposing? Trevor smiled like a shark sensing blood in the water. Simple. You publicly apologize to Melissa for the harassment, withdraw any financial complaints against her, and we all move on with our lives. Eleanor continues receiving the professional financial management she's requested, and your sister drops the lawsuit that could bankrupt your little tech company. And if I refuse? Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, we've documented a concerning pattern of your stalking behavior going back months. Phone records, surveillance footage, witness statements. The kind of evidence that might interest the police, especially if Eleanor herself filed a restraining order against you for harassment. My blood ran cold. They were prepared to turn my grandmother against me using the same manipulation tactics they'd used to steal her money. You'd really do that to her? Trevor shrugged with practiced indifference. Eleanor deserves protection from family members who might exploit her for financial gain. If that family member happens to be you instead of Melissa, well, the legal system will sort that out. The coffee shop suddenly felt suffocating. These people hadn't just stolen money, they'd weaponized family relationships, turning love and trust into tools for systematic destruction. I need time to think about this, I said. Trevor checked his watch. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, Phase 3 begins whether you cooperate or not. Phase 3. The plan to have my grandmother declared incompetent and locked away in a substandard facility while they liquidated her entire life. As I stood to leave, Trevor grabbed my wrist. David, I hope you make the smart choice. For Eleanor's sake. The federal agents debriefed me in a windowless room that smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Agent Rodriguez played back portions of my conversation with Trevor while Agent Chin took notes that would probably end up in court filings within hours. He's accelerating the timeline, Rodriguez said, replaying Trevor's threat about Phase 3 beginning tomorrow morning. We intercepted a call he made immediately after leaving Starbucks. He's meeting with Dr. Patricia Vance at 8 a.m. She's the corrupt physician who's been providing fraudulent competency evaluations. My hands shook as I processed what that meant. They're really going to have my grandmother declared mentally incompetent tomorrow? Not if we arrest them first, Agent Chin said grimly. But we need more evidence of the broader conspiracy. David, we know about 7 elderly victims across 4 states, but we suspect there are dozens more. Trevor's phone contained references to something called the Family Network. We think it's a recruiting system for finding people like your sister. The scope kept expanding. What had started as Melissa stealing from our grandmother was actually part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been systematically targeting elderly Americans for years. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a thick file. We've identified at least 43 people who've been in contact with Hamilton Holdings over the past 18 months. College students with financial problems, unemployed adults living near elderly relatives, even some nursing home employees who have access to patient financial information. Jesus Christ. The beauty of his system is that the actual thieves, people like Melissa, don't realize they're part of a larger network. They think they're working individually with Trevor on family financial planning. Meanwhile, he's coordinating dozens of simultaneous operations. Agent Chin showed me surveillance photos taken outside the Starbucks. Trevor Hamilton entering a black sedan with 2 other people I didn't recognize. He's not working alone in New York. We've identified at least 3 associates who've been here for the past week, probably preparing to implement Phase 3 on multiple targets simultaneously. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. Trevor told me about your meeting. Why are you trying to destroy our family? Grandma Eleanor deserves better than your jealousy. Even now, after federal agents had spent hours documenting her crimes, she still believed she was the victim in this situation. She really doesn't understand what she's involved in, does she? Agent Rodriguez asked, reading the text over my shoulder. Melissa has always been able to convince herself that whatever she wants is morally justified. Trevor probably presented this as helping elderly people manage their finances better. That's exactly how he recruits, Agent Chin confirmed. We found his online materials, webinars about ethical intergenerational wealth transfer and protecting elderly relatives from financial mistakes. He positions the theft as family members taking responsible control of assets that would otherwise be wasted. My phone rang. Grandma Eleanor. David, sweetie, something wonderful has happened. Melissa came by this evening with the nicest doctor, Dr. Vance. She's going to help me with some memory tests tomorrow morning. Melissa says it's just routine, to make sure I'm staying healthy as I get older. My blood turned to ice. They were already positioning tomorrow's fraudulent competency evaluation as a routine health check. Grandma, don't take any tests without me there, okay? I want to be present for any medical appointments. Oh, that's sweet, but Melissa said you've been under a lot of stress lately. She thinks it's better if family doesn't interfere with medical procedures. Dr. Vance agreed that having too many people present might make me nervous. Agent Rodriguez was already signaling frantically to Agent Chin, who grabbed his phone and started making urgent calls. What time is your appointment tomorrow? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. 9 o'clock. Dr. Vance is coming to the house so I don't have to travel. Isn't that thoughtful? Very thoughtful. Grandma, I love you. I love you too, sweetie. Don't worry about me. Melissa is taking such good care of everything. After I hung up, Agent Rodriguez looked like he was calculating battle strategy. We move tonight. If Trevor's people get that fraudulent competency evaluation tomorrow morning, your grandmother could be in a facility by tomorrow afternoon with all her remaining assets transferred to accounts we can't track. The next few hours would determine whether we could save my grandmother from losing everything she had left, including her freedom. Agent Chin returned from his phone calls with an expression that somehow managed to be both grim and satisfied. Federal judges don't appreciate being woken up at 10 p.m., but we have emergency warrants for Hamilton, your sister, Dr. Vance, and 3 associates. Coordinated arrests begin at 6 a.m. What about my grandmother? She'll be safe. We're posting agents outside her house tonight, and Detective Sarah Williams from Elder Abuse will be there when Dr. Vance arrives to explain what's really been happening. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. The arrests began at exactly 6:02 a.m., and I watched them from Agent Rodriguez's surveillance van parked 3 blocks from my grandmother's house. Through their radio chatter, I could track the simultaneous takedowns happening across the city. Target 1 secured, came the first report. Trevor Hamilton, arrested at the Marriott downtown where he'd been staying under a fake name. According to the agents, he tried to flush a USB drive down the toilet when they knocked. The drive contained financial records for 63 elderly victims across 7 states. Target 2 in custody. Dr. Patricia Vance, picked up at her Manhattan office before she could leave for my grandmother's house. Her briefcase contained pre-signed forms declaring Eleanor mentally incompetent, with blank spaces where test scores would be filled in later. Melissa was target 3. I listened to Agent Chen's voice crackle through the radio. Subject is not responding to door knocks at primary residence. Moving to secondary location. My sister's apartment was empty. Her BMW was gone from the parking garage. 3 suitcases were missing from her closet, along with jewelry worth approximately $50,000 that she'd purchased with our grandmother's money over the past 6 months. She ran, Agent Rodriguez said, checking his watch. Probably left right after Trevor's meeting with you yesterday. She must have suspected something. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have no idea what you've done. This was never supposed to hurt anyone. M. A second text followed immediately. Grandma Eleanor will never understand why you destroyed our family. Even in flight, Melissa was rewriting history to make herself the victim. The woman who'd stolen $520,000 from our grandmother and planned to have her declared incompetent was somehow the injured party in this scenario. Can you trace those texts? I asked. Agent Rodriguez shook his head. Burner phone, probably already discarded. But David, she's not exactly criminal mastermind material. She'll surface soon, probably somewhere she feels safe. Does she have friends or family in other states? I thought about Melissa's social media connections, her college roommates, the boyfriend she'd mentioned dating in Miami. She always talked about wanting to live in Florida. Said the lifestyle there suited her better. We'll coordinate with Miami field office, but honestly, she's not our primary concern anymore. Trevor Hamilton is the real prize. His operation was pulling in roughly $200,000 per month across multiple victims. Your sister was just one small part of a much larger machine. At 7:30 a.m., Detective Williams called from my grandmother's house. David, you need to get over here. Eleanor is asking for you, and she's having a hard time processing everything. I found my grandmother sitting at her kitchen table, still in her nightgown, staring at the fake competency evaluation forms Dr. Vance had left behind. Detective Williams sat across from her, explaining patiently how Melissa had been stealing her money for 2 years. But she was helping me, Grandma Eleanor kept repeating. She said my investments were doing poorly and she was protecting me from making bad decisions. Mrs. Park, Detective Williams said gently, there were no investments. Melissa was taking money directly from your savings and checking accounts. The investment statements she showed you were fake. I sat down beside my grandmother and took her hand. Her skin felt paper-thin and cold. David, I don't understand. Why would Melissa hurt me? I raised her after her parents died. I gave her everything. I know, Grandma. She's sick. Something's wrong with how she thinks about right and wrong. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of betrayal that went deeper than money. She was going to have me locked away, wasn't she? That's what the policewoman said. Detective Williams nodded grimly. The facility they selected has been investigated multiple times for patient neglect. Mrs. Park, if we hadn't stopped this today, you would have lost everything. My phone rang. Agent Rodriguez. David, we found something in Hamilton's hotel room. You need to see this. Agent Rodriguez's hotel room discovery changed everything I thought I knew about my sister's involvement in the conspiracy. Spread across Trevor Hamilton's bed were detailed psychological profiles of his recruits, including a 23-page analysis of Melissa titled Subject M7, Optimal Manipulation Strategies. He wasn't just using your sister, Agent Rodriguez explained, showing me highlighted sections of Trevor's notes. He was studying her. Look at this, subject exhibits classic narcissistic vulnerabilities. Responds to validation about intelligence and sophistication. Can be convinced that theft is actually financial planning if presented as protecting elderly relatives from their own poor judgment. The profile contained transcripts of conversations between Trevor and Melissa going back 2.5 years. I watched my sister's transformation from reluctant participant to enthusiastic co-conspirator as Trevor systematically reinforced her belief that she was helping our grandmother. March 15, 2022, I read aloud. Subject expresses concern about taking money without explicit permission. Recommend emphasizing Eleanor's declining mental acuity and need for professional guidance. Trevor Hamilton is a master manipulator, Agent Chin added. He specifically targets people who can rationalize unethical behavior as helping others. Your sister wasn't randomly recruited, she was psychologically profiled and deliberately selected. At 2:47 p.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Miami area code. David? Melissa's voice sounded small and broken. I need you to know something. I never wanted to hurt Grandma Eleanor. Trevor said we were protecting her from financial predators. Agent Rodriguez quickly set up recording equipment while gesturing for me to keep talking. Melissa, where are you? It doesn't matter. They're going to arrest me anyway. She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background. David, I found Trevor's real files. He has records on dozens of families. We weren't helping elderly people manage their money, we were stealing everything they had. When did you realize that? Yesterday, after you met with Trevor. He gave me copies of what he called insurance files, recordings and documents he said would protect us if anything went wrong. But David, they weren't protection. They were blackmail materials. He recorded every conversation I ever had about taking money from Grandma's accounts. My sister's voice broke completely. He was planning to blame everything on me if we got caught. All those documents about declaring Grandma Eleanor incompetent. My signature is on everything, but his isn't anywhere. He set me up to take the fall for the entire operation. Agent Rodriguez wrote a quick note, keep her talking. We need her testimony against Hamilton. Melissa, you can still make this right. The FBI needs your testimony about Trevor's operation. There are dozens of other elderly victims who need justice. I know. That's why I'm calling. She took a shaky breath. I'm at Miami International Airport. I'm flying back to New York tonight. I want to cooperate with the investigation. The next morning, I sat in a federal courthouse watching my sister provide 8 hours of testimony that dismantled Trevor Hamilton's entire criminal network. She detailed the recruitment process, the psychological manipulation, the systematic exploitation of family relationships that had allowed the conspiracy to operate undetected for over 3 years. By noon, federal prosecutors had identified 87 elderly victims across 9 states. The total amount stolen exceeded $12 million. 6 months later, Trevor Hamilton was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Dr. Patricia Vance received 8 years for her role in the fraudulent competency evaluations. Melissa pled guilty to elder abuse and financial fraud, receiving 3 years in prison followed by 5 years of supervised probation. But the real victory happened on a Thursday evening in December, when I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table, now equipped with brand new appliances and fresh paint throughout the house, watching her count out her evening medications with steady hands. Eleanor looked up from her pill organizer and smiled. David, I got a call from the bank today. They said the FBI recovered almost all of my money. Even found some accounts I'd forgotten about. $487,000. Not everything, but enough to ensure she'd never have to choose between groceries and medication again. There's something else, she continued, pulling out a manila envelope. I've been working with that nice lawyer, Mr. Morrison, to set up better protections. New power of attorney documents, financial oversight requirements, monthly account reviews. She handed me a copy of her updated will. I was now the primary beneficiary and financial power of attorney, with strict legal requirements for documenting every transaction. Grandma, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Her voice carried the strength that had raised 2 orphaned grandchildren and survived 84 years of life's complications. I trusted the wrong person because I loved her. I won't make that mistake again. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, sent from federal prison. I know you'll never forgive me. But thank you for stopping me before I destroyed everything. Give Grandma Eleanor my love. I deleted the message without responding. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, even when you understand how they happened. But as I watched my grandmother confidently managing her own medications, living independently in her properly maintained house, I realized that the best revenge wasn't destroying my sister. It was ensuring she could never steal my grandmother's dignity again. And I had paid for the lawyer who made it all possible. Worth every penny.